Welcome to our January 4th edition of Saturday Simulcast, brought to you by the Union Club Hotel, the 811 Bistro Boiler Up Bar. We appreciate the folks at the Union Club, Vicky Wicks and company, for making it happen. Great sponsor of ours. In today's show, we will have guest Tom Dienhart will talk about the transfer portal and get into that and where the Boilermakers are with respect to all the movings and machinations, I should say, about transfer portal and how many visitors they have, not only this weekend, but what we expect in the near future. Rob Blackman will join us in segment 2, talk about Purdue's win over Minnesota on Thursday night and look ahead to Sunday's game against Northwestern. The Boilermakers now 2-1 in the Big Ten. And finally, in segment 3, we'll have Mike Steele and Dick Satterfield, former Purdue basketball players from the 1970s and teammates of Frank Kendrick, who will pay tribute to the life and times of Frank Kendrick and their memories, tell some good stories about Frank, and to have that opportunity to do that in segment 3. So without further ado, we'll get on with the show, and thanks so much for joining us. All right, Tom, a lot of portal talk extravaganza, a whole host of visitors, January 1 through 3rd, and then another set coming in for the weekend as well. I don't know whether there's a way to summarize this or put it into some level of context, but there are a lot of guys. Barry Odom talked about how he would have, he was it 50 the first year and 55 the second year at UNLV. I don't know if we're going to get to that number, but there's been a lot of activity on the front end.
Yeah, there has, Alan. And, this stuff changes daily.
Yeah.
Guys say they're going to come visit and they don't show up. Maybe in the interim they got another offer from somebody else and they change plans. So my point is, this portal recruiting, sort of like trying to get your kind of hold water in your hands. It kind of runs through your fingers. Things change. I'm told by that from those who should know across on Northwestern Avenue. So again, just sometimes expect the unexpected, like that receiver from USC yesterday that committed, Charles Ross. I think that he was a surprise guy. They didn't even think he's going to commit that quick. So long story short, Alan, yeah, when you and I talked to Barry a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned his first 2 years at UNLV and the way he changed the roster there. Like you said, 50 guys.
Right.
23 and then in 24. So maybe Purdue reaches that level of churn as well going into 2025 here. So far, Alan, 13 players have committed / signed with Purdue out of the portal. 7 of those guys are UNLV players who are following Barry Odom. One just committed today, a linebacker named Manny Powell, who started his career at Arkansas under Barry Odom. So yeah, again, I posted something this morning. I was able to confirm some more guys that I'm told are supposed to be here on visits beginning today. Upwards of 10 or 12 more names on the site. And some very interesting names, Alan. 6 wide receivers overall. So yeah, just, and pick a position. And Purdue basically has a need there too, Alan. So they're in the market for about everything, but especially wide receivers and defensive backs.
It's interesting in terms of that. I don't know how, obviously, Barry Odom had to have had some ideas, even had he remained at UNLV. I mean, again, he was pretty adept at doing this the last 2 years. But it is just, it's amazing to me how fast, just from a travel arrangement standpoint, you got to get things figured out. Yeah. There's got to be some folks doing some logistics over in at Kozich or in Purdue Athletics and in that staff just to be able to make this all happen, to get guys in, get them out. Because there's a key deadline that you've talked about, but a key thing, just an academic calendar issue that plays into this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, these sometimes I forget, maybe sometimes you forget, viewers forget, these guys are supposedly students too. There really still is an academic component to all this. At least we're told there is. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that, but yeah, January 13th, Alan. That's a week from Monday, right? A week from this
Right.
Monday. That's the first day of spring semester classes. Remember what it was like coming back after winter break? It was kind
It was depressing.
of exciting. But I digress. It's January 13th, first day of spring semester. Of course, you don't have to be in that very date. I think guys are given maybe about a week's grace period. You can come a little bit late as a student, probably maybe upwards of 10 days. You may know specifically.
Yeah.
So again, that kind of gives you a rough idea of what the coaching staff's looking at here, as far as when they have to get their shopping done, so to speak. Probably before January, probably out of January 20th, maybe. I'm going to say the 19th. They can maybe still bring guys in. So they still have a couple weeks here to fortify their roster, because of course now they want guys here so they can go through spring football and can start to test drive the merchandise, if you will. See how guys fit in their scheme. Of course, there's a familiarity with a lot of these guys are bringing in. We've talked about the UNLV transfers, guys that Odom's coached with at Arkansas, or maybe some other staff members work with. So there's a little familiarity with the personnel, with a lot of it. But again, you want to get these guys through spring ball. And then, of course, Alan, April, there's about a 10-day portal window that opens up then. And it's not quite as active at that point post-spring football, but I think we can all expect there to be a little bit more churn at Purdue, even in that April window. Again, nothing like we're seeing now, but I think we'll see some more coming and going in April for Purdue then.
Well, that churn you mentioned, I think, was it 22 players have left the program.
I've signed. I've signed.
Have signed, and so obviously that's holes to fill to get to scholarship levels. I don't, and I may be remiss here. And how many are in the portal? Do you even know?
Here you go, Alan. Real quick. Overall, 37 guys went in the portal at Purdue.
Yeah.
22 have already signed somewhere.
Yeah.
7 went to the portal and withdrew. They came back to Purdue.
Yes.
There's still 8 Boilermakers sitting on the airplane, the transfer portal airplane.
Yeah.
So there's still 8 Boilermakers that, for all intents and purposes, are still looking for homes. And we're seeing some of those guys tweet out offers now, guys like C.J. Smith going to Central Florida or South Florida or Memphis. DeMarge Lewis has offers. I know. We see Jeffrey Emba. Guys of that ilk are still in the portal. So there you go. 37 overall, 22 gone for sure, 7 withdrawn, 8 still in. And don't forget, Alan, on top of the guys that are leaving from the portal, Purdue just suffered natural attrition with seniors, right? Gus Hartwig, Kydron Jenkins, Hudson Card, Marcus Bowe turned pro early. So there's also a raft of those guys that have to be replaced too, maybe upwards of maybe 10 or 11 of those guys. So start doing the math in your head, and the attrition starts getting up towards 50 guys right there between portal exits and guys that just left because of graduation or because of turning pro in Marcus Bowe's case.
Yeah, it is fascinating on that front because just, again, head on a swivel. And you have to think, and you would have to think in the interview process with Barry Odom, that this is a guy that, you had to be convinced that he can work well in this environment. Again, he showed it in spades at UNLV, getting the Running Rebels up to 20th in the rankings this past year with a lot of success. But man, oh man, it just seems like you're never going to be able to tell the players without a program. And that even comes at spring ball, because it's really going to be, there's a lot of these guys, obviously they want them in here now so they can get them into spring ball. That's incredibly important. And I do think that that is something that you have to look at that deal and figure out where you are and how to make that work.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting in some ways, Alan. Whenever you get something new, there's always a degree of excitement, and there's the unknown here. So, but again, I've talked about this before. With this change comes hope, right? And that's what Purdue fans need. They need hope, and we see that hope expressed on our message board. And as you walk around town, people are intrigued by Barry Odom, and what he here. So there's the promise of better days ahead. And Barry Odom's resume certainly speaks to a guy that can work in this environment, like you said. What he did at UNLV, a traditionally moribund program, was nothing short of remarkable. And again, the staff, I think, has a lot of people interested, a very mature staff, a lot of experience with a little bit of youth. And then here come the players, right? And I've talked about that. 13 commitments already out of the portal. And of course, everybody's interested in the quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Again, Hudson Card is gone, okay? Everybody, just get out of your head. He's gone. He doesn't have any more eligibility. He's gone, okay? And we got Malachi Singleton from Arkansas and C.J. Colson from Central Florida, the two portal guys that have been brought in. Of course, Garrett Odom, Barry Odom's youngest son, committed. He's going to be here. He had shoulder surgery, I was told, to his non-throwing shoulder. So he's probably not going to be a factor this year. And the one scholarship quarterback left, God bless him, Bennett Meredith. I'm told that Ben is probably going to graduate and leave in the spring. So your entire slate of scholarship quarterbacks from last year are going to be gone. All new room as far as scholarship guys go. And again, it probably will come down to obviously Singleton and Colson for the job. I think Purdue wants to bring in a fourth quarterback on scholarship, probably a portal guy, of course. They'd like to get a guy that can compete for the job with Singleton and Colson. How realistic is that to expect, Alan? Ask yourself, if you were a quarterback, would you want to come here with already two guys here from the portal? Yeah. Probably not. You're probably going to want to look for a path that's a little less cluttered. So they may have to settle for more of a developmental type guy. But I think they like to get a fourth scholarship quarterback. So again, back to Singleton and Colson. Those are going to be your two most likely combatants for the job. Two intriguing guys, Alan. Singleton's got 3 years of eligibility. Colson's got 4. Colson's a guy the former staff recruited. Similar skill sets, dual threat guys, 6-foot-ish. Singleton's a little heftier. I'm going to try to talk to Singleton here and hopefully in a couple days. I'm going to call him the favorite just because. I don't know why, but just because. But I think it's going to be, the job's going to be up in the air. And this is a job, Alan, that's probably going to bleed into the fall, I would think. Coaching staffs don't typically come out of spring football and name their starting quarterback. They like to keep everybody hungry, keep everybody engaged through the summer, get into fall camp and let them continue to battle. So all eyes will be on that quarterback spot for Purdue to see who's taking that first snap for the opener against who is it? Is it Southern Illinois or Ball State? I should know, but I can't remember which one.
I think it's Ball State, but you know what? I don't know either. So yeah, and that is it. One of the things that threat on the quarterbacks, neither of them, obviously, they're relatively early in their careers.
Yeah.
Not a ton of experience
no.
on either one of them. That's an interesting.
Yeah.
So the thought of bringing in not that Hudson Card had a handful of games experience and certainly played against Alabama, but the thought that you're going to bring somebody in of that level is unlikely, right? I mean, because that doesn't mean that Singleton are on down the road that they can't play. It just means that they're going to come in and be pretty fresh to the game, and that's going to be something that Barry Odom will have to deal with.
Yeah, you're right, Alan. If you wanted a proven quarterback out of the portal, you're going to have to pay a lot of money. And I think from what we've seen from Purdue's portal acquisitions, they don't have that kind of money to throw around. And the quarterbacks they got are certainly talented guys. There's certainly guys with plenty of potential. There's certainly guys you could develop into very good quarterbacks. They obviously aren't there yet. Colson started one game last year as a true freshman in Central Florida, played in a couple others. Singleton played in a handful of games. He was noteworthy for coming in and rallying Arkansas to a win against Tennessee, which ended up being a college football playoff team. So he flashed a lot of potential down there, Alan. People I spoke to in Fayetteville thought he had a chance maybe to push for the job a little bit, but there's a starter down there in Fayetteville who's sort of entrenched, and maybe Singleton wanted to get out of that situation. So, like you said, their talented guys are just not really overly proven when it comes to game experience. So that's Purdue's lot. They have to bank on these guys developing, tapping into that talent. And Darren Henshaw is the quarterback's coach, Alan. He coached Colson at Central Florida. Obviously, he knows the kid, likes him. Henshaw was a good quarterback himself at Central Florida. So I think there's going to be plenty of guys on the staff. Josh Henson, the OC as well. that can hopefully develop these quarterbacks so Purdue can have a good leader on offense in 25.
Yeah. And on the defensive side of the ball, any common threads in terms of, and again, it's hard to know because we don't know yet the complexity, but also exactly what the scheme is going to be. We have some ideas certainly, but any threads in terms of guys they've gotten. I mean, obviously you got the UNLV. And you're getting guys from places where you have coaches, have assistant coaches, or there are places that they've coached. But any other threads or themes that you see in the portal world at this point?
Nothing right now, Alan. 5 of the 13 commits are defensive players, 3 linebackers and 2 defensive backs. No defensive linemen, which is a concern because that's another area Purdue needs to fortify. It was a real weakness last year, and it's hard to get good defensive linemen at every level of the sport, Alan. Very hard to get good big guys. So that they have a need there as well. Those guys get overvalued in the portal. Look at DeMarge Lewis getting an offer from USC for crying out loud. So there you go. We saw the other Purdue pro guys.
Cole Brevard, right? Did that surprise you?
Well, I think he's legit going to Texas. They had the kid that went to USC. I can't remember his name.
Sullivan.
Yeah, Jack Sullivan. The other kid went to Auburn. Another one went to Miami. And these guys were okay players, Alan, but they get so overvalued in the portal because they're defensive linemen. So Purdue's going to have to battle that. They have to find D linemen. Yeah, I imagine scheme-wise, I really haven't studied UNLV's defensive scheme yet. That's Barry Odom's bailiwick. I trust he knows what he's doing. He's got Michael Shearer as his coordinator, a guy that he coached at Missouri, a younger guy. So you want guys who can run and hit, man. And if they're big guys, all the better. But guys who can run and hit, and again, but it all starts up front, Alan. I mean, you played probably football as a kid over here at West Side, and even at that level, man. It's a line of scrimmage game.
Yeah.
Line of scrimmage game at every level, and you got to have good guys on the O-line and the D-line. So that's an area I'm going to be watching closely here moving forward as this portal shopping continues.
All right, stay tuned. A lot more to come on that. We've thought, it's almost like, and of course, well documented in the college football world that high school recruiting is almost a thing of the past. Not totally a thing of the past, but
that's still going on.
But it still is, and obviously Purdue's got some spots to fill.
Real quick on that. I think the one name everybody has an interest in is Cameron Gorin.
Yeah,
of course, Brandon Gorin's son, who was supposed to sign in December, didn't. From the signals I get he's probably going to come into the fold here, Alan. He probably is going to end up being a Boilermaker when it's all said and done. That's something that could break here. Don't forget that signing day is coming up in February, too, the first Wednesday in February. Like you said, you covered hundreds of those before in your past.
Yeah.
That used to be the high holy day.
Yeah,
now it just kind of gets lost in this wash of a calendar that's cluttered with stuff that starts in December. So, yeah, don't forget about that. The 25 guys are still there. We documented some of the UNLV flips. I think they've had 6 UNLV 25 kids they flipped. Landon Brooks from Muncie, Indiana, Delta High School, a big 6'6" DN. He's coming. He told me he's coming. He's coming at the break. And then Cameron Gorin, Allen, and they may not add too many more beyond that. I think they may end up, and when it's all said and done, maybe having 7 or 8 guys. Allen, they signed about 5 or 6 guys back in December. I think the only guy that's going to really still come here is Landon Brooks.
Yeah,
I don't believe the offers for anybody else are going to be honored. Stay tuned on that. So it's just part of doing business in college football when you have coaching staff changes sometimes.
Yeah, keeps you hopping. All right, one last comment is a quick comment on the college football playoff. We've all watched and paid attention. Now we're down to the Final Four. You've covered college football at a high level for many, many years. Ohio State looks to me to be I don't know how anybody's going to beat them. I know but Notre Dame was impressive yesterday, certainly defensively in that win over Georgia. Ohio State ultra impressive in that win over Oregon. But any great words of wisdom or anything else that you see going in to the Final Four that may happen in next weekend's games?
Yeah, nothing really. It's been fun watching the Ohio State storyline. Not that I'm ever going to shed a tear for Ohio State, but I know Ryan Day was under a lot of scrutiny, let's say, and he certainly enhanced his profile, right, with 2 nice playoff wins, especially the Oregon demolition. We could end up having Ohio State playing Penn State for the national championship.
Yeah,
How about that?
I think that's possible.
And I think, the SEC stuff, everybody's chronicled that, and their pratfalls and their whining and whatnot, and the ESPN posturing. Texas is indeed an SEC school, Alan.
So yes, they are. Yes, it is.
Left. So yeah, it'd be really something if we do get a matchup of I guess traditional Big Ten teams playing for all the marbles here in the very first iteration of a 12-team college football playoff. I'm just glad we have a 12-team playoff here. I don't care if we have blowouts. Keep it at 12 teams. I want to see 14 teams. I don't care. I think the more the better we have in the playoffs, and we'll see. They got to do this for one more year out, and then they're going to revisit it. Maybe they will go to 14 teams. But I'm just glad we have 12 at this point. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far watching it for sure.
Yeah, some competitive, some, of course, Arizona State and Texas, probably the most classic game of all. But again, we'll have more to come. 3 more games left. 2 next weekend of January 9th and 10th, or is it 8th and 9th? My dates get screwed up at this time of year. And then, of course, the national championship on January the 20th. All right, Tom, thank you very much for your words of wisdom. Happy New Year to you. And we will stay tuned. Rob Blackman will join us in the next segment. And then, of course, a tribute to Frank Kendrick. We'll have Dick Satterfield and Mike Steele talk about their experiences with Frank and the Frank's passing in December. Quite a basketball life, and not only at Purdue, but the state of Indiana as well. So Rob Blackman joins us, voice of Purdue basketball. And I always get on your LinkedIn, you say Big Ten Network back to 2008. And you and I have been working together way back before then. You have been with Purdue doing Purdue basketball broadcasts dating back to when?
This is my 20th year, Alan. Yeah. Actually, Coach Painter's first year as the head coach, not as a coach in waiting, but first year as head coach was my first year on the broadcast team. And back then it was back when Elliot Bloom was still doing games with Cliz, and then I was the third part of the broadcast team. So, yeah, that goes back quite a ways.
Yeah, no doubt, and you never get used to those. It's a new experience every game, and that's the beautiful thing about it. Of course, you had the opportunity to get Thursday night in Minneapolis and a late night plane ride home, but a interesting first half. Where Purdue really struggled. Matt Painter talked about that not only on your post-game radio, but also in his post-game press comments. But what did you make of, obviously second half, Purdue got things rolling, started making shots that they weren't making in the first half. Minnesota not very good, but still always good to get a road win.
Yeah, a couple things I took away from that one. And I thought my broadcast partner, Bobby Riddell, said it best about the first half performance offensively. He called it disjointed, and I thought that was a perfect word. Yeah. Purdue did look disjointed. I mean, only 28 first half points. We jokingly talked early in the second half, we weren't sure if we could even get to 70.
Yeah.
And of course ended up scoring 58 in the second half. So that's 53 in the second half, 53 second half points. That's pretty impressive, no matter who you're playing. So yeah, just looked out of sorts. I didn't shoot it well. Had some good looks, especially from 3, but we're just 2 of 8 from 3 in the first half. The irony, one of those threes that was made was the first one, and that was a desperation 3 that Braden Smith made to get his 1,000th point. Yeah. So even the one we made of the 2 wasn't necessarily a great look by any means, but then just kind of settled in a little bit. One thing I found interesting in the second half yesterday, and again, credit to Bobby Riddell. You can tell he played under Coach Painter because he looks for these kind of things. For the fans that were really paying close attention, 3 minutes into the second half, Matt Painter started substituting offense for defense. Which now you see that late in games, in the last 3 minutes of a game, not in the first 3 minutes of the second half. couple of reasons for that. We're trying to protect Trey Kaufman-Renn from some foul trouble, but was just trying to play a little bit smaller on the defensive end, and Cam Heide provided a little bit better punch on the defensive end in that particular regard. So, again, you don't see that often when you're going offense for defense that early in the second half, but it obviously worked because it sparked something for Purdue, and they made it look awfully easy there in the second half. But, I would say this, and we talked about this on our broadcast numerous times. If you really want to feel like you're a Big Ten champion potential type of team, you have to win at least a handful of road games to have a chance. And to do that, you better beat the teams that you should beat on the road. And no offense to Minnesota, but that's a team that Purdue has to beat. Again, if you feel like you're a legitimate Big Ten champion, that's a team you have to win on the road against. And Purdue got it done. So, yeah, a little tough to watch in that first half, but second half, I will say this also. And my complaining about Purdue's first half performance, they didn't only have 3 turnovers and only had 3 for the entire game. So it wasn't like Purdue was doing a bunch of bad things. Purdue did out-rebound Minnesota in the first half, out-rebounded them for the game. So Purdue was doing good things in the first half, just wasn't making shots. Second half, Purdue continues to rebound well, continues to take care of the ball, and shoots it well. Then all of a sudden, you're really onto something, and that's what we saw in the second half.
Yeah, very, very impressive. Fletcher Lawyer was terrific, hitting his first 6. Then he missed a couple, but then threw in the one circus one. Seems to be a constant with he's just making shots, with the exception maybe of the Auburn game where everybody was overmatched in that one.
Yeah.
But this is a team, in the league, and you watch a lot of Big Ten basketball. We saw that Illinois goes on the road to the 9th-ranked Oregon and wins by 32.
Yeah.
The point of all that is, what do you make of all this? There may be opportunities to win some road games, but you better be careful at home, too. I don't think anything is guaranteed for the remaining 17 games on Purdue's Big Ten schedule.
Of all the things that really caught me or really grabbed me by surprise with that Illinois game is, they're going into the halftime horn, and their 2 leading scorers are Draven Gibbs-Lawhorn and Jake Davis.
Yeah.
Guys playing off the bench. That's how deep Illinois is. You've got guys like that getting it done for them offensively. And 2 guys that, Gibbs-Lawhorn had the really good season opening game against Eastern Illinois. Outside of that, he hasn't been great offensively. No. Jake Davis has been a role player to this point. But again, to the point I'm making, when your role players can give you that type of a punch offensively on the road, you're really onto something. And Illinois is onto something. They are certainly a talented team. When the season started, Alan, trying to be as objective as I could, I thought Indiana had the most talent collectively, top to bottom. I have changed my mind on that. I've watched Illinois enough that I think Illinois, I know Illinois top to bottom has the most talent collectively. Now, if they can continue to play cohesively as a unit the way they did in Oregon Thursday night, look out. I'm glad we only play those guys once, and it'll be the last game of the year on the road at Illinois. But, they are really, really good.
Yeah, and Brad Underwood does a job of, he's good at herding cats. He's good at bringing a lot of guys in and has had success in the portal world to make teams that play hard, and he's got some good young players certainly from that standpoint. Looking at Purdue, and obviously a lot's been made of the 3-headed monster, and they are all Big Ten level players, certainly with Lawyer, Smith, and Trey Kaufman-Renn. And that need, Matt Painter made a change in that starting lineup last night, which was interesting, and yet just the need for somebody else to step up, but also the general feeling, well, you can't win with 3 guys that are good. I don't know if I agree with that. I just think that Purdue needs Riles Colvin, Camden Heide need to get going offensively. They showed at least a little bit of that last night. But how do you view that, the whole makeup of this team and the guys, those role players that are going to be absolutely key if Purdue is going to make a run at the Big Ten championship?
Yeah, the one thing, so when Coach Painter, for those that listen on the radio network, the one thing, because I asked him, obviously, in the pregame show, hey, what, the change in the starting lineup, why? And a couple of reasons. Number one, he's trying to find the best 2 players that will complement the big 3. Yeah. Now, which is something he talked a lot about the last 2 seasons. Who were the best 4 to complement Zach Edey, right? Yeah. When you have the best player in the country, you are going to do everything offensively and defensively, quite frankly, with him being the epicenter of the whole thing. which is what Purdue was doing with Ade, obviously. As Zach goes, so goes everyone else. So you're going to complement him with the four guys that complement him the best. Now we see the same thing this year, only instead of one guy, it's three. And that's one thing Coach Painter talked about, at least to start the game. He really felt like that would be the most complementary group of two that could help those guys. And it's hard to argue with the results. I mean, Caleb has his best scoring game of the year, best scoring game since I think maybe a sophomore year. He had 11 points, 6 rebounds, was really aggressive on the offensive glass, which is something Purdue wanted. And then C.J. Cox had 5 rebounds, didn't score, but had 5 rebounds. I bring that up because that was the other point Coach Painter made in the pregame show. He does not like this team's grit right now. Yeah. And he thought that change might make his team a little grittier, if that's a word. I think that's a word. And grit being, as he explained it, it's really grit's about rebounding. Look, you can be undersized, which Purdue is, but you can still rebound. You know, you don't have to get crushed on the glass just because you're the smaller ball club. If you'll just, have a little toughness, a little grit to you, and win the rebounding battle, which Purdue did last night. I understand it was Minnesota. Okay. It wasn't Michigan State, wasn't Auburn. I get that. But at least for one game, the results certainly panned out the way you wanted them to. You had a better complementary group for the big three, and you rebounded the ball better. I would also add this, though, Alan, and this is something assistant coach Paul Lusk told us in the pregame show as well during his interview segment. Just because last night it was Caleb and CJ doesn't mean it'll be that way every night. It's really going to be more of a matchup thing. Who will be the other two guys in the lineup that from a matchup perspective will be the best fit against each particular opponent going forward. But last night, the two guys Coach Painter went with, obviously it paid off pretty well.
Yeah, Matt Painter and staff are about as good as it gets in college basketball, and you've been around a lot of it. But the fact is, in your comment about going to offense to defense, which I didn't notice, that's good for Bob. He is. You've got a good partner. You're pretty astute at what's going on as well. I just think that he's still he's not grasping at straws, but it's really coming down to game by game, but also trying to put those pieces together that are going to work. And that's not a discredit to this team. There are a lot of teams that get that, but this might be a team, maybe, that kind of like the 19 team that really can figure out a way to put it all together at the right time. Is that your sense as well? How do you look at that?
Yeah, certainly. There could I think you can draw some similarities and comparisons that are pretty dead on. It's also worth noting, I mean, this is still just game number 14.
Yeah.
And it's only game number 3 of the Big Ten season. So there are still some kinks to be worked out. I know fans don't maybe always want to hear that, but we're into the first week of January here. And you do not want to be playing your best basketball in the first week of January. And there have been some fans that have been a little disappointed in the early performances. I'm not exactly sure why when you consider the schedule Purdue's played. But as I keep telling them, Alan, just look at NC State last year. All you have to do is get hot at the right time. And NC State went all the way to the Final Four. They went into their conference tournament thinking knowing if they lose, their season's over. Next thing you know, they're in the Final Four. So it is a work in progress. Purdue is going to continue to improve as long as they can rebound the ball, at least in a manner that keeps them close on the glass. They're not going to dominate like they did last year. When you have Ade, that's an obvious. You're going to lead the country in rebounding. They're not going to do that. But at least keep it even on the glass or close. And if you can take care of the ball like Purdue did last night with only 3 turnovers, hey, Purdue is skilled enough now that if you give Purdue more possessions than you get, you're going to be in trouble. And we saw it last night.
It's interesting. Purdue fans are for lack of a better term, are spoiled rotten. and
I like it. I kind of like it.
It's the fact that you've been number one in each of the last 3 seasons. And I don't think anybody in God's green earth thought this team would be at that level, maybe for the entire season. We'll find out.
Yeah.
But it is funny. The thing that's been a little bit, it's been disconcerting, but the way it is, and again, you saw it last night in Eugene, is that there have been a couple lopsided losses. Even Northwestern goes to Penn State and plays them heck of a lot closer than Purdue did. Again, what do you make of those? And do they matter, in terms of, Auburn's going to beat a lot of people like that. They're a college basketball team, maybe as I've seen in the last few years. and UConn aside, they certainly are in that level of what we've seen out of UConn. But what do you make of those games? Even Penn State early on. This is a team is as much a case of trying to figure itself out and working its way towards something else in January, February, and March.
I'm going to start by going back to something you just said to start your question there, and I think it's so astute. You talked about our fans being spoiled. It's a great problem to have. So it's frustrating at times, but it's a great problem to have to know when we're not ranked number one in the country, everyone's losing their mind. I mean, think about that. Just go back, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, Alan, would Purdue basketball ever been to a point where if you're not number one in the country, folks are wondering, what's wrong with Purdue? What a great problem to have.
Yeah.
That's where the expectations are now at. And I think that's wonderful. Yes, it can get frustrating at times, but man, it's certainly a great problem to have. But to follow up on what you're talking about there, this is a team that probably, I hate to say it, fans, probably has another clunker or two in it.
Oh, yeah.
Just because of their youth, right? This is not the Zach-Edey team of last year, the senior dominated team with Mason Gillis and those guys, where you basically, I'm telling you right now, and I've shared this story a lot this past summer on the speaking circuit, Alan, there was not a game last year, not a single game that I went into that I did not expect Purdue to win.
Yeah.
And when Purdue lost, it was like a shocker, like, oh my gosh, how did Purdue lose? We're Purdue. I don't have that feeling this year with this team, only because it's a younger team that's going to have some growing pains, even 14 games into the season. So there is going to be another clunker or two along the way. I'm just certain of that. It's just kind of how this team is right now. But it's still skilled enough, still good enough that it can make a push for a Big Ten championship. It can make a push to be a team to get to the second weekend of the NCAA. What are the keys? I've mentioned them a couple times. As long as Purdue can stay close rebounding and take care of the ball, they are skilled enough to scoring the ball and certainly good enough offensively. I don't know that P.J. Thompson gets enough credit for how good of a play caller he is. And especially in the second half, you saw that last night. I mean, we had Minnesota's head spinning on defense, the things we were doing offensively. So now, if you're going to give the ball away, 10, 15 times a game, I had the number written down for last night's broadcast because I always like to bring it up if I think it's appropriate. Last night it wasn't, but here are the numbers. In the loss against Penn State, points off turnovers, 32 points.
Yeah.
Loss against Auburn, points off turnovers, 23 points. You cannot play high caliber competition and give them 32 points right off the bat. That's like starting off the game down 32-0.
Yeah.
You can't do it. You can't win. So take care of the ball. Purdue has a pretty good chance of winning.
Yeah, I think that is a true statement, and I think this team will continue to improve. And I thought it was important last night. Jakari Harris hits a big shot. Yes, CJ Cox doesn't score, but he gets 5 rebounds. Again, we talked about first play. Raleigh Burgess though didn't do a whole lot last night, but you just sense he's going to continue to get better. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting next 2 months in Purdue basketball. And I just recommend to fans, why don't we just sit back and enjoy? This is a work in progress, and that for just about every team, except for maybe the very, very elite, the Auburns of the world right now, Tennessee on down the line, it's all a work in progress for just Duke, just about everybody else. So from that standpoint, okay, look at Northwestern now, and a team that has been difficult for Purdue. Really, even both of the last 2 years at home has been difficult. And certainly last year it came down to the end, but it came down to a game where I thought Purdue was dead in the water in the game in West Lafayette.
Me too.
And they come out, Braden Smith makes a couple huge plays. Purdue wins that game. They lose. Have lost the last 2 years in Evanston in somewhat remarkable fashion. My point is Northwestern is a load. They went to Penn State and played very competitively. They don't look the part, but they play the part, and they play a style. I guess from you, I'd like your analysis of what makes them so difficult. Yes, Boo Buie is finally gone.
Thank goodness.
This is a team that can cause Purdue problems, and I expect to have problems on Sunday if you're Purdue.
Yeah, well, we used the word gritty earlier in this segment, and that's probably the best way to describe Northwestern. Just a gritty ball club. And you are right, getting off the bus, they do not look the part, but man, they find a way to win games. And you look at Nick Martinelli and Barnheiser, Brooks Barnheiser,
Yeah,
two of the best in our league. I mean, last I checked, I think they're the only two in our league. They're the only team in our league that have two guys averaging 20 points a game in those two guys. And then you throw in Ty Berry, who's certainly a capable scorer. He played really well against us. If you remember last year at Mackey Arena, he had a hell of a game. So they're more than capable offensively, and defensively, they don't do anything fancy. But they just do a good job of keeping the ball in front of them. As crazy as that sounds, they just keep the ball in front of them, and they make you score over the top of them. And they play this type of defense that basically is, we don't think you can make enough contested twos over the top of our defense to beat us. So you have to find a way to be creative and score offensively against them. Transition offense will be so big. Purdue, this season, for those that have followed closely, have been one of the better transition offenses in the nation. Now, last year, Thursday night against Minnesota, there wasn't a whole lot of transition offense to be found. 0 transition points in the first half. But when Purdue is able to get out and run, they're actually really good in transition offense. So I think that'll be a key, because you can't, if you try to play all 40 minutes in half-court offense against a set Northwestern defense, it will be extremely difficult to beat these guys. And both games last year went to overtime. They always play Purdue tough. You know how it is, Alan. You've been watching basketball for a long time. There are certain teams at certain segments of time that, for whatever reason, always play it tough. Doesn't matter what the record is. They will always make life difficult on you. Currently, we're in the Northwestern phase of that. All right, they are the team that is always playing Purdue tough, regardless of talent level. So it will be very difficult. I'm glad we don't have to play up there this year, because that place has been tough to play the last couple of seasons. You mentioned it, lost the last couple of times up there.
Yeah, no doubt. In interesting style both times. All right, last question for you. Just the landscape of the Big Ten. We've talked about Illinois a little bit, or Oregon. It seems to be a balanced league. Does not seem to be an elite league at this point. Right. And I don't know whether that's fair or not. Maybe Illinois is. I don't know. We'll find that out. Who else out there do you see that? I mean, there's everywhere you turn, I think you see some level of danger. But it seems that maybe we're not talking about that will be really interesting to see, and maybe make a run at the upper third of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I'll start with your first thought there. You're right. I think the Big Ten is a good league with no great teams. Maybe you said it, Illinois. Maybe Illinois changes my mind on that by mid-February, but I don't see any great teams in our league. Now, the SEC has a couple of great ones. Yeah. We do not, but we do have a very good balanced league this season with a lot of good teams. No great ones, at least not I've seen yet. But again, the way I alluded to it earlier, I've changed my mind on Illinois as far as being the most talented team. I think that's where they are, and I'm not so certain that they aren't the team to beat after what we saw them do Thursday night in Oregon. I haven't watched Oregon as much. I know I should now that they're in the Big Ten, but I have not seen them play a lot. So look, they're in the top 10, so they must be doing something right.
Yeah.
And Purdue has to play out there in just a couple of weeks, actually. So I'll be interested to see how that game goes. So if you're looking for an upper tier of ball clubs, I would put Oregon and Illinois up there, along with Purdue, and then Michigan State is right there in the mix as well. Again, they're a top 25 team. Their guard play is solid, as it always is, but their big man play has gotten better this year. They've made some real improvements across the board with their bigs. From where they were a year ago anyway. Although it's basically the same guys back, but just a more seasoned veteran group. And then look, I'm still not certain that Michigan won't be in the mix here. Boy, Dusty May's done a nice job. It's mostly the guys he brought with him in the transfer portal. They start 2 7-footers, which is very rare to see in college basketball, and both are very skilled. So I would say those are the teams right now that, if I'm a Purdue fan, which I am, those that have me the most concerned. But again, I thought you hit it right on the head, Alan. Our league, at least for now, does not have a great team. Have a lot of good teams, but not a great one, at least not at this point.
Yeah, Purdue has on paper a somewhat advantageous run here of schedule, but
on the front end, yes. On the front end, yes.
On the back end, not as much.
So
but that is also making assumptions, and no one's assuming that Purdue's going to go to Rutgers and roll, because Rutgers has got super talent in the backcourt, dealing with some injuries there. But they are a team that and even going to Washington, which on paper is a game that you can win, but again, it's a road game.
Look what they did with Maryland Thursday night. Maryland, I would have taken Maryland to win that game, but so you're right, man. It doesn't get any easier by adding those 4 teams, that's for sure.
Yeah, no question. All right, Rob, thanks so much, and thanks for the relatively early morning duty after a late night last night. Winning the barn is always a good win for Purdue. We'll look forward to your work. You can catch Rob if you're listening to Purdue basketball on Purdue Basketball Network with Learfield. Rob's been doing a great job for a long time, and I always will say one thing about you, and you and I have known each other for a long time, but the tribute you made to Larry Clisby last year at the right time when Purdue's going to the Final Four, one of the great moments in my view in Purdue of humility, and that was a moment that you shared posthumously through Larry, but I know how much his legacy means to you, and you live it out so very, very well. And I just thought that was a fantastic moment. That and Rob Hummel and Matt Painter were my two favorites from that standpoint. But you do it right, and you do it. You pay respect to the institution that it is, and that's Purdue basketball. Of course, Purdue football too. That's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that down the road.
Sounds good. Hey, thanks for having me, Alan. This was fun. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much. We'll be back in a couple minutes, and we will bring in Dick Satterfield and Mike Steele, guys that Rob knows, guys that Purdue men's basketball, former Purdue men's basketball players. We're going to also talk about somebody else that Rob knows and knew in Frank Kendrick and the life and times of Frank. In his contributions to Purdue basketball over the years. So we'll look forward to doing that. So stay tuned. We'll see you in a couple minutes on Gold and Black Live. Joined by, I always kid Dick Satterfield because he was really the original 15 in basketball, kind of. And then they had a guy named Zach Eady. There have been some other 15s at Purdue too, but Dick Satterfield joins us. And Mike Steele. I don't know if Mike Steele's an original as it is. They haven't had that many 41s over the years. John Kitchell's one that comes to mind. Jim Rowinski, right? Jim Rowinski was number 41.
Yeah.
So I guess so Mike might not be the top number 41 of all time. I don't know. But
I told the grandkids when I brought them the game, I said 41, it's in the rafters, and the 10-year-old said, Pop, that says women.
Yeah. There you go.
So I tried.
We are going to pay homage to a dear friend of all of ours, and Frank Kendrick, of course, who passed in December, and a Purdue basketball legend in a number of different ways, and certainly on the basketball court and as an assistant coach, and a character in many different ways. These guys knew him well because they were teammates of Frank's on the 1974 NIT championship team. Both Dick and Mike played very important roles in those games. Mike was big in the garden. He's one of those guys when the lights come on. Mike Steele showed up. And Dick Satterfield, I'm not going to mention his game against Iowa, but he did a lot of really good things for that basketball. And he was a charter member of the Soul Patrol the next year. You can Google that of what that was. I don't know if that's a politically incorrect term. It really isn't anymore. But Dick Satterfield, guys that have been very attached to Purdue men's basketball for a period of time. Dick, I'm going to start with you. Frank, bigger than life character. I think I wrote in the story he was full of it sometimes, which he was, but he also was a terrific basketball player. And there's one thing that seemed to be a common denominator that you two share too. He loved Purdue. He went through a trial separation for a while. We'll hit that subject as well, but really unique character. And we miss Frank, and there never has quite been one quite like him in a lot of ways. Would you agree?
Absolutely. The first time I ever saw Frank, I'd read about Frank being from Hagerstown. You read about him in Indianapolis Star, really good player from Tech. And he was a year behind McGinnis and Downing. So anyhow, I'd heard about Frank, and I remember I was a junior in high school, and Richmond had beaten us in the first game of the sectionals. And I was over there on a Saturday afternoon watching more sectional games, and into the gym comes a guy named Frank Kendrick, and he was holding court as a senior in high school. The thing I remember the most about him was he had a purse, which he continued to carry at Purdue. But he was a wonderful guy. And one of the things that I appreciated so much about Frank was how well he treated me. I was a nobody on that team, and he treated me like I was a somebody. And I will miss him deeply. And I'm forever thankful to Coach Painter for getting him back into the family after, as you called it, Alan, a trial separation.
Yeah, I think that's it. He's the first person I ever saw with a purse, and the first person I think I ever saw or with a car phone.
Well,
it was like a phone that sat on his armrest, and I don't know how it worked. It
didn't. Steely will tell you too. It didn't work, but it looked like a car phone, but it didn't work.
There you go. That would be Frank. Mike, your thought, your initial. Obviously the passing's a difficult thing, and yet he was been a staple of Purdue basketball for a very, very long time.
Every time I'd go to a game, and you'd see Frank, he truly would make you feel like you were the most important person in the stadium, in the arena. That was just Frank. And before I get into Frank, though, I'm going to tell you what Sat really contributed when he was at Purdue was his GPA.
Yes, he did.
I think they kept him on the team his freshman year because his GPA was like having two smart people. And then he almost blew it because I think he had 1 B his whole career there. And I think I had 2, but most of mine were C's and D's. His were all A's. And so anyway, but back to Frank, the phone. What happens? Frank didn't pay his phone bill, and so it was turned off, and so he unplugged it from his apartment and acted like he had a car phone, so that girls would say, "Hey, you got a car phone," and then the rest is history. Yeah, so that's, and then remember when we went to New York and like the only people that were dressed exactly the same were Clyde Frazier and Frank Kendrick.
Frank Kendrick, yep.
They had the fake mink coats. I mean, Frank's was fake. Clyde probably his was real, I'm sure. But no, to Sat's point, and when I was on the freshman team, because they had him back then, Frank was always nice. He was always nice to me, but I didn't really know him. But my sophomore year, he was great with everybody. But I think the first time I got in a game and I made a cut and I was wide open and Frank didn't throw it to me, he shot it. And we came down the floor. He said, "Steely, my bad. I'll get you next time." Well, after the season, I said, "Frank, you're not here anymore. When are you going to pass it the next time? Because you missed me the last 25 games." Oh, yeah. But he would tell you that what he said. He'd look you right in the eye and go, "Steely, my bad. My bad. I'll get you next time." Yeah. But, man, he could score.
Yeah. He was. I don't think people realize what a great player he was.
Yeah.
He could score on the baseline. He could spin on the baseline. He could rebound. I mean, we had some really good players, but Frank was the best player his senior year for sure.
Yeah, and he had a good – Fred Schaus was a perfect coach for him too, because he coming from the NBA, he let Frank be Frank. He'd shoot some bad shots, but I mean, he could run stuff for Frank and get him open, and all you had to do was get him the ball with just a little bit of daylight, and something good would happen.
Yeah, I think one thing about when your teams ran the court extremely well. I mean, that was, and you had other guys that could fill the bill from that standpoint. But Frank fit that well. I mean, he could get that rebound and get it out and go. And that was one thing that he seemed to me to make him unique. Like you said, Mike, with Fred Schaus's offense and the way you guys played, you guys could score with the best of them.
Yeah, it fit right in. And then, we had other guys that could shoot it. And then we had Park, who, you know how good Park was, and he was unselfish. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that Braden Smith is so good at. We just got to start, as we talked earlier before we we just got to start making some shots. But anyway, we'll get into that later. But Frank and Frank, that my sophomore year when we won the NIT, Frank that whole year was a great teammate. I mean, he was he was great and treated us all. You know, we had a great group of guys that year because everybody respected each other and hung out together. It was a great season.
Dick, the conduit to Frank, and at least in my life, was Bob King, and because Bob had so much to do with probably so much to do with his recruitment. And Frank came to Purdue and was not academically eligible his freshman year, and had to sit out as what I think they called non-predictors in those days.
Right.
But came in and worked his way into being, he had to mature a fair amount. I think it's a fair way to say it, from his sophomore to junior to senior years. But talk about the connection. We've all talked about Bob King and the role of that, but that Indianapolis, getting a guy from Tech, of course, Bob coached at Shortridge. He knew everybody down there, but getting Frank was a big deal at that time, just because, like you said, on the heels of McGinnis and Downing, there was a lot of talent in the city of Indianapolis around that time.
Yeah, and Steele and I, we love Coach Bob, and we could have a whole show on Coach Bob, but Frank and Coach Bob were similar in that they both treated you like you were the most important thing going. I mean, I wasn't important at all. Steele was a little bit more important than I was, but at the end of the day, neither one of us are very important, but Coach Bob treated us like we were. But yeah, Frank loved Coach Bob. And, one of the things that's not talked about enough, but Frank graduated from Purdue, and he worked hard to graduate from Purdue.
Yes, he did.
And I would say that in some ways, Frank would tell you the thing he's proudest of in his life might have been that degree from Purdue. And he worked hard. I'm sure Coach Bob must have really worked hard, right, Steely?
Yeah. I know. Coach Bob, you think about it, we didn't have computers, we didn't have study hall, we didn't have any of that stuff. It was just Coach Bob had his people on campus. You'd miss a class, and by the time you got to practice, you'd have a note on your locker room. See me's, CB. I'm like, oh, geez, how do you find out? Yeah.
No, I remember, and I think it was like paying tribute to his mother too. Just the fact that how much that meant to his family that he had graduated and did it. I think he did it on time. He did it. I think he graduated in '74, and that was very, very impressive. I do want to go back to this because Frank's disdain for IU. Now that, again, during his trial separation changed a little bit, but you guys had one of the most difficult games that I can recall in Bloomington. Frank's senior year, your last game it was the last game of that season, and you could have snuck your way to the playoffs. It ended up Michigan and Indiana play in the playoffs in the '74 to make the one spot in the NCAA tournament, but. Just some memories from that '74 season and what Frank meant. I mean, that game, but of course, another game you lost, but it's certainly a memorable game was North Carolina State and David Thompson. But the game I also thought was a game that changed the season. The home game, that is, of course, against Michigan and Campy Russell. Terrific game and took everything Purdue had. And Jerry Nichols, I think, broke his nose in that game, as I recall. But that was a game that Frank also came up big against some of the best talent in the league, a team that ended up winning the league that year. But just your overall memories of that '74 season and Frank's role in that. Dick, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I remember that. It's interesting you say that about Michigan and North Carolina State, because we had North Carolina State beat. And they came back and beat us in the second half, and they won the national championship that year. Right. And I'm not saying we would have won the national championship, but we could have won the national championship. We were really a good team. Frank, people forget, but his junior year, he had a game winner up
at Michigan,
Harvard, right? And we won that game. And I thought Campy Russell, and I'll be interested to see what Mike says. I personally thought he was the best player we played against. And we played against some really good players. We played against, of course, David Thompson, played against Marvin Barnes. We played against Tom Henderson. We played against a ton of good players. But Frank he had a will to win. The other game, Alan, you didn't mention, and I wouldn't expect you to because we won. But I'll never forget, we were playing at Ohio State, and we were tied with 2 seconds to go, and Ohio State had a 1-1.
Yeah.
The guy missed the free throw. Frank got the rebound. They fouled him. He hit the shot. So we started off, I think, 6-0 or something in the Big Ten, and it was a tough league back then. But yeah, Frank, he had a real will to win, and between him and Garrett, we had a lot of places we could go to get points.
Yeah. How about that Indiana thing, Steele? Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was back when the Big Ten had, ironically, like what you might call 10 teams.
I know, crazy.
And before I get into Frank playing that year, but I was just thinking, Frank, he got in trouble as assistant coach for either taking somebody to the airport at the wrong time or putting somebody, whatever it was. He would have been stellar right now when there's no rules.
Yeah.
There's no. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. And, Frank never met a stranger, and I'd have hired him in a second, especially nowadays. I mean, he was, and nobody could express their love for Purdue any better than Frank Kendrick could.
Yeah. You go on to his assistant coaching career, 1991 to 1999. And certainly there was other good coaches on that staff, Bruce Weber, certainly, and then some, but in different roles. But Frank had a lot to do with getting a Glenn Robinson to Purdue. Conzo Martin, but some other circumstances.
So I'll tell you a funny story about that. So when Frank was recruiting Glenn, I used to come to some Purdue games, and I'd always noticed Frank was down with Glenn right before the tip-off, and Frank and Glenn were right out under one of the baskets. And I remember I said to Frank one time, I said, "What are you telling Glenn?" He said, "This can all be yours." And Steely said it. I mean, nobody could convince somebody like Frank could. And Frank got a lot of great players. He got Glenn, he got Conzo. He would have had
Deron Cornell, Mike Robinson,
Deron Cornell. He would have had Porter Roberts. He would have had Caron Butler. He was coming to Purdue.
Yeah.
You're right, Steele. I can't imagine how good he'd be today with no rules.
No, but he'd have been great. He'd been great.
Yeah. Frank's attention to and again, Purdue had some pretty staunch standards of how they did stuff, and not that Frank was aggressive. And Purdue, I think Gene Cady felt like that was something he needed in recruiting at that time, and was able to do that. And certainly, you mentioned that, and I think that's there were some guys that Purdue was in on at that time and Caron Butler being one, and I'm drawing a complete blank of the center at Wisconsin that Purdue had.
Rashard Griffith.
Rashard Griffith, and that that might have been the missing piece to the '94 team winning the whole shooting match. With all due respect to Brandon Brantley and others, but this was that was the deal. Talk about that too, guys. And you've been around long enough with guys like Brandon Brantley, Conzo Martin, others that talk about just that allegiance to Frank. I mean, obviously they was recruited to him, and Frank, after leaving Purdue, the NCAA investigation and all that, and you can debate what it wasn't the world's most serious infractions, but it was enough to and at the end of the day end his career, at least at Purdue. But that allegiance to him in terms of what he brought from a recruiting standpoint, but also how difficult that was, not only for the Purdue, you got people right now that even 25 years later that talk about exactly what you said, and that is that Frank made you feel important, and Purdue fans have a lot of allegiance to what he brought to the table, not only from that time, but also when he left after 1999, it was hard. So, Mike, I'll start with you just in terms of that. And I don't know how much I know you stayed in touch with him, but that was a hard time for him being away from Purdue, and a hard time for Purdue as well.
No, he never really, to me, never blasted Purdue. I think he just knew that he'd made a mistake or a couple mistakes, whatever, but he didn't think they were huge mistakes. And in retrospect, they weren't.
No,
but
they weren't.
That was a different time. But to his credit and to Purdue's credit, because I know that Dick mentioned Matt, but I think he was really the deciding guy that said, "Hey, we got to get Frank Kendrick back in the family." And and he did. And so that's because it was a tough time for Frank.
Yeah.
So Alan and Mike, I'll tell you a story that Ann and I, my wife Ann, we went to visit Mika and Christoph, Melanie, and Emil the Saturday. He passed away on a Thursday. We were in Florida. We were flying back, and I thought for sure we were going to get there in time. But Matt had called me on Wednesday, and this just shows the kind of guy Matt Painter is. Matt and Brandon were down there visiting him on the Wednesday, the day before he died. But I found out later from Christoph, and I thought this says so much about Trey Kaufman-Renn. He came down and visited Frank on Sunday because Frank had an impact on Trey deciding to go to Purdue. And it's like what you said, Steely. I mean, all these years later, Frank is still recruiting for Purdue. And I think Trey would tell you that's one of the reasons he went to Purdue was because of Frank.
Yeah, no doubt. He was involved, in his son, Christoph, very involved in the AAU world. But Frank was involved, so much talent down in Indianapolis. And of course, Trey was from Scottsburg, right? But or is from Scottsburg, but Southern Indiana. But a huge factor in terms of that. No question, his legacy is not only his playing days, his coaching days, but really, like you said, and his return. And Matt Painter had everything to do with that. And to his credit, that's why they have that great culture there from that standpoint. All right, final thoughts, guys. Mike, I'll start with you. Just anything else that you didn't get to say here about Frank that you'd like to add to the fray?
No, I just. He just made me smile every time I saw him. Like I might not see him for a year, and as soon as I'd see him, I'd kind of go up behind me, and then he'd always say, "Steely, man, you look great, man. If you'd have waited, I go, no, Frank, I'm fat. I don't look great, But no, and he cared about. Whenever you'd see Frank, he'd ask about all the guys we played with. He'd say, "Have you talked to Park? Have you talked to Sat?" I mean, that was just his. That was his personality. And I truly believe that anybody that he played with, if he really needed something and needed some help, Frank would have been right there to help.
Yeah, no question. Dick, your final thoughts.
Yeah, my only thoughts are he was a great player. He was a great coach, but he most of all was so proud of Frank for the husband he became and the father. Just a tremendous person, and he leaves behind a great family. Purdue family, and we got to make sure that we support Mika and the kids because they were a true family that Frank oversaw, and he did a great job.
Yeah, it's intensely loyal. Their kids are to him. He was obviously intensely loyal to Frank, but from all the kids, and I knew 2 or 3 of them better than others, but it is just a tribute to him in terms of that. And Mika is up for sainthood. We know that from that standpoint, but that's a whole nother show we can get into. But Frank, there's nobody quite like Frank, and I do think that's Matt Painter's going to have a long legacy at Purdue when his days are done. But one of the most important things he did is kept the Purdue basketball family intact. And like you said about Frank, on a personal note, that was back when we could have players over at houses and for dinner, and Frank would treat the Karpik family like we were important as well. Even I was 13 years old, and he'd bring a person, so we thought that was cool. So never anybody like Frank. So guys, thanks so much. We will have another discussion about that team that's playing on the court. Purdue basketball, of course, played last night against Minnesota and have a big game Sunday. Every game is going to be tough in the Big Ten this year for Purdue as the Boilermakers take on Northwestern on Sunday. All right, guys, thanks again. I want to thank our guests, of course, Tom Dienhart, Rob Blackman, and Mike Steele and Dick Satterfield for their appearances on our January 4th edition of Saturday Simulcast. Also, thank the Union Club Hotel for its sponsorship. We appreciate them. We look forward to there'll be a show pretty much every week during the course of the Big Ten basketball season, as we will be breaking down not only all the transfer portal news, but men's basketball recruiting on down the line. So have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week on GoldandBlack.com's Saturday Simulcast.